Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of Sorastro's Zombicide Black Plague painting series. In this episode, we're going to complete the core box by painting Samson from Simon's Zombicide Black Plague. Samson's limited colour palette and shiny leather textures make him quite a straightforward but fun miniature to paint. Let's take a look at the painting stages. I've chosen to prime Samson in black, followed with some zenithal highlights applied from above. When applying the base colours, I'll be using some quite thin consistencies for the darker areas to allow the zenithal highlights to show through. We can then shade the miniature before applying our highlights, which I'll be pushing quite far to create some reflective looking textures. As usual, our finishing touches will include painting the facial details and providing some blood. Let's begin. I'm going to start with the skin, and I've chosen to use two different tones to sketch in some initial light and shade. For the darker areas, I'm using Bugman's Glow, which I'm darkening with a little black. And for the lighter areas, I'm using Cadian Fleshtone, which I'm lightening with some white. As usual when I'm wet blending, I've added a couple of drops of Vallejo's glaze medium to extend the drying time. I'm starting with the darker tone, which I'm using to sketch in the areas of shadow. I'm now switching to the lighter tone for the remaining areas. We can then rinse the brush and loosely blend the tones together. We can add additional paint as necessary if the coverage feels a little thin. I'm now continuing round the body, working on one section at a time. Once dry, we can add an extra layer as necessary. Although we don't need to be too refined at this stage, you could mix an in-between tone if you like to add some more intermediate highlights. I'm now going to paint the beard and hair using a roughly equal mix of Mechanicus Standard Grey and Steel Legion Drab, and I've chosen to create both a darker and a lighter tone by mixing in some black and some white respectively. So here's my mid-tone of Mechanicus Standard Grey and Steel Legion Drab. And I'm now mixing the dark and light tones. I'm then using the three colours to create a basic sense of volume. Once dry, you could apply some initial highlights with the lighter tone if you like. For all of the areas of black leather, I'm going to mix some The Fang with some black. I'm correcting any mistakes as I go. I'm now going to thin the paint down using some water and glaze medium, although just water would be fine, and I'm using this to provide a more translucent layer to the larger sections of leather padding. This allows the areas of raised highlight to clearly show through, which will make our lives much easier in the highlighting stage. You can see I'm soaking up the paint from any areas it's collected where I'd rather have a highlight. I'm also using this for the gloves. Once dry, we can add an extra layer to any areas that seem too pale. Next I'm going to mix roughly equal measures of Leadbelcher and black for all of the main areas of metal. For the feet and leg armour, this can also be kept reasonably thin to allow the zenithal highlights to present themselves. I'm using a more opaque consistency for the anvil and the armband. For the leggings, I'm mixing an equal amount of Naggaroth Night with some Macragge Blue, which I'm then desaturating with a little black. I'm also going to create a highlight tone with the addition of some Ivory. Here's my purple and blue mix. And now I'm adding the black. Next I'm creating the pale highlight tone with the addition of the Ivory. I'm now applying the dark tone to most of the area except for the top of the thigh. And here I'm placing my highlight tone before blending the two together. Finally, we're going to paint the hammer, and I'm using an equal mix of Steel Legion Drab and Screaming Skull for the handle. For the shaft, I'm mixing Rhinox Hide with some black. I'm also using this for the dagger sheath. For the head of the hammer, I'm using a roughly equal mix of Mechanicus Standard Grey and Dark Sea Blue for the mid-tone. I'm then going to use black for my dark tone, and I'm going to mix in some white to create a highlight tone. I'm painting the underside with the black. I'm now using the mid-tone to paint the upper portion of the front plane of the hammer. And I'm using the lighter tone to paint the lower portion before blending the tones together with the damp brush. The top of the hammer naturally wants to be quite bright. And I'm creating a similar gradient on the back to that which we used on the front. I'm now using the lighter tone to highlight the edges of the form. And I'm now mixing in some additional white to push the contrast further the closer we get to the top corner. I'm applying this quite roughly to create a more textured look. I'm now adding some additional noise elsewhere because I don't want the hammer to look too smooth. I'm doing this by stippling on some darker spots, and I've chosen to rework the gradient to create a rougher, more stone-like appearance. I'm now finishing the hammer off with a few small touches of pure white. With the base colours complete, we're ready to add some shade. I'm going to begin by shading the skin using Reikland Fleshshade, which I'm thinning with Lahmian medium, and I've chosen to mix in some optional Seraphim Sepia to create a slightly more bronzed skin tone. Next we can shade all the areas of leather and metal with some Nuln Oil. I'm also using this for the handle of the hammer. and I'm brushing this down the side of the leggings to help articulate the stitching. Finally, I'm using an equal mix of Nuln Oil, Agrax Earthshade and Lamian Medium to shade the hair and beard. We're now ready to add some highlights. I'm going to begin with the skin, and I'm mixing a little Light Ochre into some Cadian Fleshtone to produce a slightly more golden look, although this is of course entirely optional. Here we're mostly cleaning up and redefining the areas of highlights that we sketched out earlier. I'm now mixing in some Kislev Flesh to begin moving up to the brighter tones. And I'm now using pure Kislev Flesh. Before going any further, I've chosen to push for a slightly cooler tone in the shadows by mixing some Bugman's Glow and Dark Sea Blue. I'm using the consistency of a heavy glaze. I'm now returning to the highlights and I'm mixing some Ogryn Camo and some white into the Kislev Flesh in a couple of stages. Here's my brightest tone. To introduce some more reddish tones for the nose and cheeks, I'm mixing some Evil Sunz Scarlet into the highlight tone. I might do this tentatively at first, then add additional red until I have a level of saturation I'm happy with. And I'm now mixing in a little white to provide a small final highlight. For the areas of black leather, I'm returning to the original base tone of black and the Fang, and I'm adding Ivory to produce the highlight tone. You can see I'm jumping in with a fairly bright tone. This is because I'm mostly building on the lighter raised areas that have resulted from the prime and base layer processes. I'm keeping these highlights quite tightly focused so we don't end up with large areas of pale grey. I'm now mixing in additional ivory in a few stages. I'm making some fairly bold leaps in brightness because we need a high level of contrast in order to create the impression of shiny leather. Even if the transitions aren't particularly smooth, we can still achieve some quite striking effects with these high contrast and tightly focused highlights. If you do wish to tone any areas down, we can simply glaze on a little black. I'm now adding a few specular glints with pure white. To further enhance the shiny look, I'm now using the purple base tone we used for the leggings to provide a reflective cast to the downturned sections of the apron. we could also apply this to the underside of the gloves. I'm now using some of the paler leggings tone to provide a lighter reflection. I'm now returning to the colours we used for the hair and beard to pick out a few of the raised strands of the texture. And I'm using some pure white for the extreme highlights. For the areas of metal, I'm using a roughly equal mix of Stormhost Silver and Karak Stone to provide a few glinting highlights. We can also use this to articulate the buckles. Here I'm returning to my leather highlight tones to pick out what looks like leather sections of the boots. And I'm now highlighting the anvil. For the handle of the axe, I'm using Screaming Skull. And I'm creating a paler version of the leggings tone with some extra ivory to refine the highlights on the legs. I'm now using some Rhinox Hide for the upper handle of the axe, as well as the dagger sheath. With the highlights complete, we're ready to add some finishing touches. I'm now going to paint the eyes with some ivory. And I'm making a correction with the darker skin tone before dotting on the pupils with some German grey. And here I'm adding a final spot of ivory to correct an oversized pupil. We can also use the ivory to articulate the teeth, as well as the stitching we can see on the boots, leggings, gloves, and the dagger sheath. I'm now painting the base using the same colours as described in the previous episodes. And after providing a protective matte spray, I'm now adding a touch of blood using my usual mix of Tamiya Clear Red, Rhinox Hide and Black. Thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed the episode and indeed the series. I am extremely grateful for the positive feedback that my Zombicide videos have received, and I hope to be able to cover some of the expansion figures at some point in the future. My sincerest thanks as always go to the amazing patrons for funding this series of videos. It takes quite a leap of faith to rely on the generosity of others to make a living, and it's hard to fully express my gratitude to my patrons for helping make this work possible. Join me again soon, and happy painting!